Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to welcome everyone to the 17th Biennial Ralph H. and Ruth F. Gross Lecture. Thank you for attending either physically or online. Thank you also for bearing with us during this delay. Before we proceed, on behalf of the University of Miami, I want to acknowledge the ancestral and traditional territories of the Seminole Tribe of Florida, the Council of the original Miccosukee Seminole Nation, Aboriginal peoples, and the Miccosukee Tribe of Indians of Florida, who are the original owners and custodians of the land upon which we stand and learn. I am not going to name all of Dr. Gardner's illustrious achievements, but I do like to joke with him that probably the most impressive one to me is that he was the distinguished speaker for the 13th Biennial Gross Lecture back in 2015, during which he delivered a speech on the Affordable Care Act, implications for the future of healthcare in the U.S. linked with education and medical knowledge. Dr. Gardner will now introduce today's featured lecturer. Dr. Gardner.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you again for bearing with us. Not only did we have this non-tropical storm that has slowed down even the members of the Gross family from making it on time, but has made the whole day a bit of a challenge. So thank you for being here. I'd like to just say a word to thank the Gross family for the $1 million endowment made by Ruth Gross in honor of her husband, Ralph, who first used the Calder Library before World War II in investigating the cause of the death of his poultry on his farm, which led to the development of supplements and other enhancements to the development of poultry farming in the United States and his business. That success is commemorated in some small way by the endowment, for us a big way, which allows us to sponsor a diverse variety of speakers talking about the health of the population, of people in general, and today with a focus on aging. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Karen Kofler. I could also spend a great deal of time talking about Dr. Kofler, but I think we'd rather hear from her than me. She graduated from the University of Miami with her MD degree, trained in internal medicine at Henry Ford and the University of Colorado, did an advanced fellowship at the University of Arizona under Andrew Weil, thought to be the father of integrative medicine by many of us, and has had a career which has progressed first in Chicago and then eventually back here in Miami in a variety of circumstances until we were able to attract her here to the University of Miami to be director of the Osher Center for Integrative Medicine and to develop a curriculum and a patient care program focused around a more expansive view of medicine and preventive care than traditional healthcare allows. It is therefore my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Kofler, who's going to talk today about stronger aging, a subject in which I have particular interest.
All right, thank you for your patience again. Okay, so yeah, you all can see it okay? Yeah, okay, great. So I don't love, I mean, there's a huge interest now in anti-aging, longevity. I don't like any of those terms. I like the idea of aging in a stronger, fuller way. I haven't figured out what the right terminology should be. And what I realize is that there are many things that we can't control. I realize that more today than probably ever in my life, but there are some things that we can control. And once we have cleared a path towards that, I think it's incumbent on each of us to take a look at how we're living our lives to figure out whether or not that is bringing us closer to our goals of being healthy for as long as possible. Right now, the way the curve looks is we sort of decline until we finally die. And the goal of the work that we do at the Osher Center is to actually keep people as robust and healthy as we can until one day at 102 years old, we just don't wake up. But hopefully we'll be playing tennis the day before. So this is our clinic here at the University of Miami. It's in the CRB building. And this is actually how it looks. And it was very carefully designed to look more aesthetically calming so that going to the doctor is not a stressful event. And our patients really appreciate that. Our center was founded by the Osher family, Bernard Osher, who began his first endeavor in this at University of California, San Francisco, about 25 years ago. And their mission, both he and his wife, are committed to improving the quality of life, as well as support for higher education. And many of you may have experienced the OLLI courses that they also have funded. Okay, while she's working on that, the Osher Collaborative, we are one of 11 centers, 10 of which are in the United States. They're listed here. And the 11th one is at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. And we get together very regularly. Once a year, we all gather at one of our sites to talk about the trials and tribulations of bringing integrative health into academic medicine, as well as collaborate on a variety of research projects. One of the things that we're spearheading here at the University of Miami is how do we get Chinese medicine and acupuncture into the hospital system, into outpatient centers? That's being led by Dr. Dervais, with whom I work. Okay, so our mission is to be a model of transformative healthcare utilizing the principles of integrative health. And our goal is to help people realize that they need to take a personal responsibility in their own healthcare. So integrative medicine, just so that we're all on the same page, is a healing-oriented medicine, which is different from the way we are trained as physicians. As physicians, we're trained in disease management. And as an intensive care unit doc, I realized one day while I was working with a patient at 2 a.m. that had been admitted 6 previous times for the same problem, that what I was doing was futile in the long run. I was basically stabilizing this patient, getting him out to the floor, getting him discharged, only to welcome him back again 6 months later, 3 months later. And in fact, I came to that conclusion when I looked around the ICU that night and realized I knew half of the patients in the unit from previous admissions, confirming for me that we are not getting at the root. And so that began an existential crisis for me. I had significant student loan debt, so I couldn't go off and be an outward bound sailing instructor as I sort of dreamed of. I needed to pay back my loans. So I was searching for something more and came across the Fellowship in Integrative Medicine, which was just starting as I got accepted into it. I'm not going to spend time on the principles because I want to get more involved in the meat of how we think through any patient that we see. I hope that in listening to what may be a rapid fire session, that you all can listen with the intention of finding some one thing that you could do for yourself using some of the principles that we use. Okay. I will say, though, there is tremendous focus now on longevity studies. This diagram shows you some of the ways we're beginning to look at it, from genomic instability and telomere altering to insufficient nutrient sensing and absorption to cellular senescence and microbiome alterations. So there's a number of ways that scientists now are looking at the process of aging that looks radically different from when the NIH first founded the Institute on Aging. So from a functional and integrative medicine perspective, when we're sitting with patients, regardless of what they're presenting us with, we're looking at essentially 7 systems to discern whether or not there is disruption in one of these systems. Because our feeling is what shows up on the outside that we label as rheumatoid arthritis or cardiovascular disease actually has an origin internally, an imbalance, a loss of homeostasis that in this person, due to genetics or lifestyle, has resulted in a condition that we label, whatever it is we give as a label, and then we treat. Our feeling is, can we go upstream to that? So these are the systems I'm going to walk us through, or rather, these are the systems we're going to now sprint through. All right, so just to acknowledge that aging is woven into our biology, and it's the result of accumulated environmental insults that we may unwittingly be exposing ourselves to. We can't undervalue the impact that lifestyle has on longevity. This was a study that was done just looking at if you follow these 5 factors, kept a healthy weight as you aged, ate a healthy diet, didn't smoke, moderate alcohol, and did regular physical activity, you would live significantly longer than people who didn't follow that. So there is no doubt that behaviors and not pills have a bigger impact on longevity than anything else. And I just want to make a mention about the role of genes. So of our 20,000 genes, only about 20 to 30 are responsible for an individual's lifespan. And when you consider the fact that about 16 genes govern your eye color, that is not a lot of real estate that our physiology devotes to longevity. More important, we're finding, is epigenetics, which is those factors that influence the expression of genes. And that's where lifestyle plays a huge role. I also want to make note of the fact that we are 10 trillion cells performing 10 million biochemical reactions per second. We are an extraordinary machine, and there's very little of that that's under our conscious control, but there is some. So let's go through these systems. Okay, beginning with digestion and absorption. In my practice, we always begin here. This is probably one of the most fundamental areas that we think about, and so did Hippocrates. As we age, there's a lot of stuff that happens with our gut. We make less acid and enzymes, setting us up to be less able to absorb nutrients. We typically experience slowed motility, which means toxic metabolic waste will be around us for longer, and that can alter some of the milieu that our gut lumen is bathed in. And there are fundamental changes in our microbiome. And the microbiome now is the fastest growing area of research, with about 10,000 publications a year, because we now realize that the microbiome influences so many functions in the body. So many researchers are actually calling it the organ we didn't know that we had. About 70 trillion organisms compared to our 10 trillion, 250 times more microbial DNA than human DNA. That's what we carry. So we're almost vehicles for a whole world of tiny organisms. And they're everywhere, as you can imagine. They're in every orifice. They live on our eyelashes, and our every single mucosa is covered with these organisms, and they support us in a multitude of ways. In the gut, they help us produce critical nutrients like vitamin K and biotin, and they help us with folate synthesis. They help us to absorb other nutrients. They help us fight off pathogens, because of course, every time we eat or drink, we are taking in a whole world of other organisms that could take root under certain vulnerable conditions. They regulate our immune function within our gut and outside of our gut. They help us ferment non-digestible compounds, and in return produce compounds like short-chain fatty acids that actually fuel the health of our colon cells. So they're working symbiotically with us. Systems-wide, they influence our central nervous system. They regulate our metabolism, influence our hormones, as well as our immune system. And we know that the more diverse our microbiome is, the healthier we will age. Diversity, like so many other situations in the world, is essential for good health of any ecosystem. And plenty of studies are coming out along these lines. Here's one, the gut microbiome is a modulator of healthy aging. We know now we're getting to the point where we can identify what microbes, what bacteria, this is very small. Oh no, you can see it. What bacteria play a role in what diseases? For instance, obesity and firmicutes, irritable bowel. Many patients with irritable bowel have an overgrowth of a genus called proteobacteria. And we see this when we test our patient's stool. We also see this in all kinds of organisms, from the Drosophila to the African turquoise killfish, which is alive for about 14 weeks. These are tiny fish that grow in these temporary pools in Madagascar. How a scientist knew to study these tiny fish, let alone withdraw their microbiome and inject them into older fish, I do not know, but my hat's off to them. They found that when you transplant the microbiome of a younger fish or Drosophila or whatever other organism they're studying and insert it into an older organism, they live longer. And we also see that as we age, there is a whole variety, a whole evolution to what we experience. And it's influenced by a variety of things, like how we were delivered. Were we vaginally delivered or C-section? Were we breastfed or bottle fed? How were we weaned? What foods were introduced? What have been our life stressors? Knowing that whatever stresses us stresses our microbiome. Were we exposed to medications? We know birth control pills and metformin and antibiotics all change the microbiome, and so on. So the more insults that we aggregate over time, the impact can be realized in the gut microbiome. And now we know that what influences the gut microbiome influences other tissues, including our brain. A lot of research is being done in this area, looking at neurodegeneration and its relationship to the microbiome within the gut. So the gut plays a critical role in optimal aging. And as I mentioned, as acid and enzymes decrease, our ability to extract nutrients decrease. Poor motility can lead to a greater toxic burden, and the reduced microbial diversity leads to a whole variety of issues, including insufficient nutrient production and the accumulation of toxic waste that affect our mood, immune system, insulin sensitivity, and so forth. So how do we work to protect our microbiome? Number one, a plant-based diet. You know, there's this huge argument in my field, keto, carnivore, vegetarian, Mediterranean. There's a million different arguments going on what's the best diet. All I know is Michael Pollan said it best. Eat less, mostly plants. Oh gosh, sorry. Anybody know this quote by Michael Pollan? It's eat plants, not too much. One more, sorry. At any rate, it's a good, those two you can remember, eat plants and not too much. Because the fiber that's in plants, let alone the colorful polyphenols in the brightest colored fruits and vegetables, are absolutely essential for the health of the gut lining, as well as just allowing normal motility, as well as lowering cholesterol levels, as well as helping to control glucose, and make fermented foods a natural part of your diet. So if you don't add sauerkraut to your salads, tonight is a good time to start. In fact, sauerkraut's one of the best foods you can be eating, a fermented food that's rich in fiber and very tasty. So that's an easy, low-hanging fruit. Regular bowel movements. I can't tell you how many of my patients, when I ask them, do you have regular bowel movements? And they'll be like, yeah, about every 3 days. And they think that that's regular. That is absolutely not regular. Avoidance of injury. We try, especially as our patients are aging, to get them off as many medications as possible. We try to avoid antibiotics unless absolutely indicated. And we really try to avoid acid suppression. When you suppress acid, you are altering the milieu all the way through the gut. We replete with adequate enzymes and acid, and we may use probiotics, although I favor fermented foods. And then one other thing about digestion is it's incredibly important to give it a rest. For those of us who are noshers or grazers, the design of the gut is to eat at certain intervals, because then another function of the gut kicks in, which is clearing out debris. And so if you're constantly snacking through the day, you are altering that function. This was a very well done study by Walter Longo. He's probably one of the leading authorities in this area of intermittent fasting. That's probably fodder for another talk. These are some of the tests that we do from an integrative and functional medicine standpoint. They're a little more, we tend to like to test to see if our hunches are correct. So we use some less conventional testing. Okay, that's the first system. We've got 6 more to go. All right, system 2, energy production. A very common issue that I see in my clinic is fatigue, and you can blame this little critter for insufficient energy production. Does anybody know what little organelle this is? Mitochondria, yes. My favorite organelle in the cell is the mitochondria. And depending on the function of the cell, there could be up to 10,000 mitochondria within a cell. So if it's a heart muscle cell or a skeletal muscle cell, we'll see more and more mitochondria being created within them. David Sinclair, who's the author of Lifespan, he's a Harvard researcher who is probably best known for producing a supplement featuring NAD. was one of the early people who had shown that mitochondria are involved in lifespan modification. And so lots of people are rushing to come up with nutrients that can improve mitochondrial function. As we age, we accumulate oxidative stress with the formation of free radicals. And those free radicals, if not quenched, injure mitochondria. Dysfunctional mitochondria then injure cells and make cells dysfunctional. But the good news is we have the capacity to recycle our mitochondria. We have the capacity through a process called mitophagy to actually break down mitochondria and reassemble them into new mitochondria. So we want to make sure as we age that we are maintaining or even increasing the number of mitochondria. And we want to make sure that we recycle their parts efficiently. So one of the best ways that we can maintain and increase mitochondria, does anybody know? It's a physical activity, strength training. If you are not lifting weights, tonight is a great opportunity to think to yourself, I'm going to start a strength training program. We've seen studies with 90-year-old men who are brought into a gym who are able to build muscle mass. Muscle mass is one of the most important biomarkers of healthy aging. So one of the ways we can build, we actually increase mitochondrial density within muscle tissue as we increase strength of whatever it is that we're moving. So strength training, no matter what our age is essential. Other strategies, making sure we get adequate nutrients. The mitochondria are very demanding in terms of the nutrients that they need to operate optimally. Avoidance of toxins. We know, for instance, that certain heavy metals have a negative impact on mitochondrial function. We talked a little bit about exercise. Intermittent fasting, time-restricted eating can have a very positive impact on mitochondrial function, particularly through mitophagy. And then there are supplements that we might use, for instance, L-carnitine, which we know helps shuttle fatty acids into the mitochondria to be used to create ATP and energy, as well as other herbs. Some of the testing that we might do in our office includes these. We won't go into that. Okay, system 3, immune function. We know that our immune cells protect us from another number of things, not just infections, but also malignancies and our ability to respond to injury. But it also helps us identify self from non-self, and both over and under active immune function can happen as we age, resulting in autoimmune conditions, infections that overwhelm our system, and malignancies. As we age and our T cells age, we see weakened antimicrobial immunity, which is why at 90, we get pneumonia that if we had contracted it at 40, we would have rather easily gotten over it, but we don't get over it as well when we're much older. We also see a reactivation of chronic viral infections, which is why we encourage the shingles shot, as well as impaired anti-vaccine responses. I always tell my patients, before you get your vaccine, any vaccine, you fast, exercise, and take a cold shower. All 3 of those improve immune response to vaccines. We see insufficient protection against malignancies, as I mentioned, and predisposition towards unopposed tissue inflammation. So that can manifest as heart disease, as osteoarthritis, actually as osteoporosis and neurodegenerative diseases. What we see in people who are extremely long-lived is that their B cell response is much more aggressive and impressive than their T cells. So what are some strategies that we can use to improve the health of our immune cells? We want to encourage autophagy. We want to make sure that our system is able to clear out debris, let's say. And some of the strategies that we know can do that include an anti-inflammatory diet, which is, again, a plant-based diet, fasting and caloric restriction, exercise, and actually cold exposure, which is not as easy here in South Florida, although I would encourage you to jump into this gorgeous ocean we are blessed to be in front of all year long. Just a little side note, that's my goal every year, is to get in the ocean every week through the entire year. That was easy when I first moved here from Chicago. I couldn't understand, why aren't any of these Floridians going into the ocean? But as time has gone on, I've understood it a little bit better. But there are many wonderful physiologic benefits to cold water plunges or even exposure to cold water in your shower. So one way to do this is take your nice warm shower and end with a cold shower. People are shaking their head. No way. Just try it and see. Just try it and see. So we know that it can improve metabolic health. It increases brown adipose tissue, which makes us more metabolically fit. It can improve our mood and cognition. It enhances mitochondrial biogenesis and autophagy and decreases inflammation. So give it a try. There are some supplements that we use, particularly vitamin D3, but also curcumin is a wonderful natural anti-inflammatory. And then there are specific mushrooms that we might use, including maitake and shiitake and reishi. All right, we can look forward to some new approaches. Hopefully one day we'll actually be able to use stem cell therapy more widely. There's the use of exosomes, peptides, and natural killer cell therapy that are in the future as well. Okay, on to system 4, hormonal health. So with the exception of cortisol, most of our hormones, possibly thyroid, seem to decline with age. And the one hormone that I really want to pay attention to is insulin, because we know that as we need to start producing more insulin in response to probably what is too high a carbohydrate diet, we see a breakdown in systems. And therefore, we see the rise of continuous glucose monitors like this one that is teaching people a very interesting and personal lesson as to what foods seem to spike their glucose and therefore their insulin. As far as sex hormones, we know that women experience a significant decline in estrogen and progesterone as they reach menopause, less so with testosterone. Men experience a more gentle decline in testosterone as they age. Both of these are incredibly important for bone health, brain health, cardiovascular health, and so forth. So we might test some of these and try to optimize them. I see lots and lots of people with very high cortisol levels. It's typical of the anxious age that we're living in, especially at night. We often see people's levels rising when they should be going down. Those of you who have trouble falling asleep, or if you know people who are tired but wired, that's a pretty classic sign of high cortisol levels in the evening. And something as simple as phosphatidylserine, which is a naturally occurring compound that is in your body already, can be used to lower those. So by far the most important thing to control as we age, I think, is insulin. And we keep very tight insulin levels on our patients. We work very hard to keep lower insulin levels than what's typically seen on a usual blood test. We consider hormone replacement therapy, and we seek to optimize thyroid function in our patients. Okay, so now we're on to system 5, detoxification and biotransformation. How are we doing? It's a lot of information in a short amount of time. I'm impressed. All right, so some of the main organs responsible for detoxification are shown here, but there is one organ missing, and I'm wondering if anybody can identify which. Oh, that's interesting. Pointing to your brain, that's a good one. Okay, there are 2 organs missing, brain and skin, absolutely. So I have to update that slide. All right, so we make a lot of toxic products just in day-to-day operations, but we're also exposed to many, many toxic waste products, especially today with the plastics and the glyphosate. And my neighbor who lives across the street, every time she sees a roach, I see Truly Nolan out in front as she sprays away in the neighborhood. All of these compounds have to be broken down by our liver and other organs. And with any one of those is work, but the layering and upon layer of different chemicals that we expose ourselves to. I read a study where they showed that a typical woman exposes herself to something like 250 different chemicals before she leaves the house every day. We were not designed to have that number of exposures, and it's been implicated in a variety of diseases, including dementia. Many of these have an impact on our ability to methylate, and not all of us are outstanding at a process called methylation. In fact, many of us carry a variety of, I don't want to say faux pas because they're so common that they're not really, but we all have our own unique ability to degrade through a process of methylation different compounds. And we may do that very well, but most of us have some issue with it. And as you add to the complexity of our exposures, you challenge the process of methylation, which we know has an impact on DNA and RNA expression. So some of the strategies we might use to improve detoxification, we want to make sure, again, that we are using our systems of detoxification, including our bowels and sweating. Sweating is a good thing, a very good thing. We should all be sweating at regular intervals. We want to make sure we have an abundance of phytonutrients. Those, of course, are rich, again, as I mentioned before, in the antioxidants that neutralize free radicals and are useful in phase 1 and 2 and 3 of liver detoxification. We want to minimize our exposure, including our medications. We don't want to use Febreze. We don't need fabric softeners and great smelling things in our laundry soap. We don't need to be spraying and scented candles and car scents and so forth. All of those, whether you breathe it or skin is exposed to it or you ingest it, you're putting a burden on your liver. And we want to get plenty of deep sleep because it's in deep stage sleep that our lymphatics swell and it'll help us essentially flush out the debris that's been created through a busy day of thinking. So again, you want to think about the products that you have at home and make sure you're using clean cleaning products. Remember that when they use the word fragrance on anything, it can be any one or several of about 300 different chemicals. No company has to declare exactly what fragrance means or how many are in there. You want to be mindful of your cookware, avoiding plastics. I think all of us know this by now. I remember my husband once brought home weed killer to my house and I was like, you can turn around right now and go back to Home Depot and return it. We'll pull out each weed by hand. This is a great resource, the environmentalworkinggroup.org. They've been working for a long time to identify the cleanest sources of fruits and vegetables, what foods need to be because of the way they're grown, the intensive nature of the pesticides and chemicals that they use, called the Dirty Dozen versus the Clean 15, that you don't need to buy organic necessarily. So that's a worthwhile website to check out. Okay, coming into the home stretch now, our transport system. So we're mainly talking about blood pressure and vascular health. And I'm just wondering if everybody in this audience knows, what is the ideal blood pressure? What was it? 120 over less than 80. I like it closer to 70. And I've noticed over the years how that's marched down from the 140s to the 130s and now the 120s. So really we like it below 120 and below 80. And I don't think I need to go into cardiovascular disease here, but we do very extensive testing for cardiovascular health, including some of the blood tests that I've listed here. I like to get a coronary calcium score on most of my patients since cardiovascular disease is still the #1 killer in the United States. And we like for patients to have their own blood pressure cuff at home and be checking that at regular intervals so that we know where they generally live and we can pick that up early. Some of the strategies that we use for optimizing blood pressure, there's exercise again. It's like a cure-all. Of course, not smoking, but there are foods that can help lower blood pressure, especially if they're regularly in your diet, including hibiscus tea and green tea and garlic and beets and so forth. Magnesium is a wonderful mineral that we've used. I actually remember using it as an ICU doctor to resuscitate patients, but magnesium can be used to help lower blood pressure. It's also calming, so it's a very nice mineral to take at night. And then strategies that mitigate the stress response. I think teaching every doctor who then can turn around and teach every patient how to meditate is arguably one of the most important skills we can teach our students and teach our patients. I think everybody has to have a foolproof way of alleviating their own emotional lability or reactivity. Very often my patients will say it's exercise, which I'm all for, but if you're in a tense meeting, to say, excuse me, I got to go for a real quick run. I'll be right back. Doesn't usually work. So the ability to sort of withdraw from the drama of what's going on in the world or right in front of you and calm yourself lowers blood pressure, lowers inflammatory cytokines, has a whole host of benefits, and it's free and it happens in a second. So if you don't have a practice along those lines, I think meditation or prayer or imagery or yoga nidra, or there's a variety of other practices, is incredibly important for healthy aging. And when I was in Chicago, there was a cardiologist at Rush who got tired of prescribing medications for his patients for their heart hypertension and heart disease, and invented a device called Respirate, which is basically just using breathing techniques as a way of lowering blood pressure. And studies have shown it does indeed drop people's blood pressure with regular use. Okay, so some of the strategies that we use, we advocate a Mediterranean diet, which is largely a plant-based diet, plus some exercise, and again, fiber. So you're going to hear, as you've heard, a lot about exercise and fiber, exercise and fiber. And by the way, how many grams of fiber should we be shooting for? Does anybody know? 30, at least 30 grams of fiber a day. So homework assignment. Calculate, starting tomorrow, calculate how many grams, it's easy to do, pull out your phone, I just ate an apple, okay, 6 grams of fiber. Calculate how many grams of fiber you're ingesting per day and shoot for 30 grams. If you're on a plant-based diet, you're probably gonna hit it or be very close to it. And lastly, we're okay with time? Okay. The musculoskeletal system. Okay, so we actually begin to lose muscle mass starting in our 30s with a 30 to 50% reduction in both number and a 10 to 40% reduction in size of skeletal muscle as we age. And our strength declines faster even than the mass. So you may still look strong as you age, but your actual ability to move things, and including yourself, is being reduced. Adequate protein and antioxidants are really essential in order to maintain and build muscle mass, along with tight sugar control. One of the things that I like to do in my office is the sit to stand test. Many of you are probably familiar with this. If you score less than these in 30 seconds, we have a problem. Your quadriceps are some of the most important muscles in terms of healthy aging. Your ability to get up off the floor is a marker of early morbidity and mortality, or your lack of ability to get up off the floor. So maintaining strong muscle mass is incredibly important. We're also learning a lot about fascia. Fascia is that sort of Spider-Man covering that's on the inside of our body that I learned you just simply cut through that shiny stuff on your way to whatever organ you're addressing. But in fact, the fascia is incredibly important because injury to the fascia affects the tissue below it. And it affects the nervous impulses that are traversing through it, as well as or traversing nearby, as well as the blood flow through it. And this is an image, that sort of crystalline looking structure is an image of what the fascia looks like. Helene Laugavin, who's now the director of the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, has recently, actually this summer, just said, the more we learn about fascia, the more it becomes clear that it plays a significant role in our health. One of the things that we often send patients to is myofascial therapists. And almost inevitably, when they get worked on by a myofascial therapist, which can either be physical therapists or massage therapists, are typically trained in this additional certification, patients will get off the table and immediately feel like they have a greater sense of fluidity in their body. They feel more opened up. Constrictions that we just live with as we age, from the minor and major insults that we've experienced, can be worked through. So if you suffer from musculoskeletal discomfort, it behooves you to try myofascial work. A brief word about bone health. This is an area of my great interest, is because the impact of a hip fracture is absolutely life altering for so many people that experience it. At any one time, up to 5% of your skeleton is undergoing repair. We're constantly altering our bones. And the ability for the osteoblasts that are laying down bone and the osteoclasts to do their job in taking up bone or removing bone, they are talking to each other. They are highly interdependent, which is one of the reasons why I've chosen to really concentrate on a better approach to bone health, because when we interrupt that process, we interrupt a natural communication between osteoclasts or bone tear down cells and osteoblasts or the building up cells. Genetics may play a role, and certainly hormonal loss, especially in women, plays a role, as estrogen as well as testosterone, progesterone, and DHEA. But other things that we inadvertently get exposed to and do play a role in osteoporosis, which we see as an inflammatory condition. So whether we've been exposed to steroids or have a diagnosis of diabetes, if we've had eating disorders, insufficient protein, which is a very big contributor, as well as lack of activity and low vitamin D, all play a role in our bone health. So the greater the systemic inflammation, the more activation of osteoclasts, which are by their nature, they are immune, they are of immune origin. So if there is immune system activation, the osteoclasts are activated as well. When we see osteoporosis, we search for the source of inflammation. So how do we maintain bone health as we age? And this is for both men and women. We make sure we move, and we make sure we're doing some serious strength training. Again, myofascial release so that we don't neglect areas that have been injured. And then we may use very specific targeted supplements that have been shown to have an impact on osteoblastic function. That was the 7 systems. There you have it. So let me just end by sharing what a typical day might look like in somebody who's committed to optimizing their well-being. First, we would love it if everybody got up and had their green tea outside in the sun. So that they're producing melatonin, they're getting their vitamin D, they're taking a moment before they dive into their day to sort of reflect on their lives, be intentional about how they would like the rest of their day to look, and activate their practice of centering and grounding. Stretching your body so that you awaken your fascia. And as I said, finding time to meditate. I'm all in favor of coffee. I couldn't have gotten here without it. But coffee has a tremendous number of health benefits as long as you don't suffer from arrhythmias or fibrocystic breast disease or anxiety or whatever, or reflux. I think coffee is a wonderful thing to start your day with, along with green tea, whichever you prefer. Now, 150 minutes of exercise a week is very low, not sufficient. But I would say if you've got to start somewhere, that's not a bad place to start. And at minimum, 2 days of strength training. I do think some degree of daily yoga, and by that I mean intentional relaxing into a stretch pose, is very important. That can be done on the floor or in a chair. It doesn't have to be in a yoga class. There's your cold shower to get you going. Look at how happy she is. There's the saying I was looking for: eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That's Michael Pollan. And then we'll use personalized supplements, supplementation, as I mentioned. I think some of the basics that we'll use are vitamin D3, a multivitamin, and magnesium glycinate. Not all multivitamins are created the same. There's an art to that. I generally don't go for Centrum. We often see them undigested, coming out the other end. Instead, there are other better companies out there. Have a dog or a cat or some other animal that is very happy to see you returning home at the end of your day. More physical touch, I think, is really important for the human experience. I think we're I think we're a society that does not necessarily engage in that as much for a variety of reasons, but we know that it has many health benefits. Having ikigai, or purpose and meaning, we ask this of every one of our patients. Why do you do what you're doing every day, day after day? What gives your life the greatest meaning and purpose? And how does that show up in what you choose to put your attention on every day? We talked about diet, green tea. Up above, you see golden milk, which is made from turmeric and is incredibly tasty. If you have access to an infrared sauna, many of us, live in buildings that may have this. An infrared sauna has many, many health benefits, and it can be very relaxing at the end of the day. And then great attention to sleep. We are a nation of not so great sleepers. Anybody in this room a great sleeper? Wow. We want to know what your secrets are. Please stay and teach the class. All right. So, whoa, excuse me. This is where I'm proud, happy, ecstatic to call home. And I so thank you for your patience and with my late arrival, and your patience and interest in listening to me today. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Bear with me for a second while I stop sharing. And then there is a microphone in the room, and there's also pop-up microphones that you can use if you have a question for Dr. Koffler. Or she can repeat it. Also, for those online, if you raise your hand, I can unmute you if you'd like to ask a question.
I'll repeat it.
My first question is what is a good vitamin D?
Okay, so that's sort of person dependent, but you probably won't go wrong if you're on at least 2,000 IUs a day. You don't have to get a fancy vitamin D. That's one you can get at Walgreens or Publix, because vitamin D is very inexpensive to make. But I do want you to have it with vitamin K in it. Yeah.
Could you repeat the question?
Vitamin K affects osteocalcin, which helps make sure that D stays within bone.
Could you repeat the question?
I'm sorry. What's the ideal vitamin D3 or vitamin D?
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Your thoughts on Prevagen?
My thoughts on Prevagen. Well, my former boss, Andrew Weil, endorses Prevagen. First of all, you can at my last count, there's about 40 different brain health supplements that you can take that have data behind them all. My concern is if you're taking all of them, you may not have any room for food, which has many more compounds than supplements will give us. I think, first of all, I've had patients take it and feel that it made a difference. So if you are using Prevagen and you feel like it is helping with mental clarity and cognition and focus and so forth, just as my patients who take lion's mane or magnesium threonate or curcumin or ginkgo or any one of an assortment of other things, I think that's great. It's not instead of all the other things that I talked about. In fact, I think everything else that I talked about probably has more of an impact on brain health, but I do think supplements can help. Any other questions? Are there programs that senior citizens could subscribe to that would allow them to engage in their own healthy aging process? Does the school offer it? So that's an excellent idea. I would say to you that one of my prior iterations was the medical director for Canyon Ranch. Clearly a sort of exclusive club that they had on Miami Beach. They also have it in Lenox, Massachusetts, and Tucson. I chose to take that position because I was curious to see what a community devoted to health would do for people. A patient that I saw today is 93 years old, and I used to take care of her at Canyon Ranch. She continues to deal in art. She's extremely engaged in all kinds of things. So my conclusion from that experiment that lasted about 10 years is that when you are in a community that is committed to the same values, that is very supportive of your own path in that direction. So that's the ideal. We don't have it yet here, but you've given me a very good idea. So Dr. Schwartz, who is the former chair of family medicine and my direct boss, has a very keen interest in this area. And we've been in conversation about how we would develop longevity, for lack of a better word, programs. So we're not there yet, but thank you for giving us a little nudge.
I have a question. You mentioned a lot about different habits we could do for daily routine of us eating and taking care of our body and exercise. Is there anything to be said about spending time outdoors and being part of nature?
Wow, great question. So what about being out in nature? When we teach medical students, we have two cohorts a year. We have them for a month. They do an elective with us. The first week of each month that they're with us is devoted to human health and its relationship to the planet. And they spend a lot of time outdoors intentionally during that week. And they have assignments, like they have to read the book Braiding Sweetgrass. I don't know if anybody has had a chance to read that incredible book by Robin Wall Kimmerer. All what we are trying to do. And then we have them recall stories of when they felt a sense of healing through nature. So that is such an excellent point about the use of nature as medicine. And again, we're blessed because all of us can get in front of the ocean within an hour at the most. Every one of us can take advantage. And it's very hard to be both anxious and sit in front of a sunrise here in Florida, looking out over the ocean. I co-authored an article called Nature as Medicine with one of my OSHA collaborative colleagues. I think that's a very important point that you make. Anyone who has spent time in nature knows that there is something different that happens for them when they're out in the woods or in the water or so forth. And I think that's our natural healings, I think that's our natural medicine. I think we feel well because that's what we come from. And using it intentionally can be part of your own health journey. So thank you for raising that. Good point. Okay, any other questions?
We do have a question in chat. Can you say more about the relationship of community, friendships, and relationships to healthy aging?
Yeah. Well, no one says it better than Vivek Murthy, our Surgeon General. And if you haven't read his book, it's brilliant. We happen to also use one of his lectures in our med student elective so that the students appreciate how important it is, especially as we age and we may not have a lifestyle that brings us in community over and over. Well, we know that it's essential. We know that it lowers stress hormones. We know it activates oxytocin, which is a healing hormone, which I did not mention in this talk. And it's not easy. I have kids on every coast. We fragment very often as families, as opposed to sort of raising as a clan the way we might have in other times. There isn't much more I can say other than it is an essential component to healthy aging. I think it's an essential component for every one of us, but particularly important as we age. So, yeah.
We have one more question in chat.
Mhm.
Can you field one more question?
Mhm.
Thank you. Can you please give recommendations on how to carry out fasting as a way to promote autophagy?
Autophagy. Yeah. So I am not a huge advocate of just do a 3-day water fast, do a 5-day water fast. That's something that somebody has to work towards. I'm not even sure it's essential. One simple thing that we can all start doing is stop eating at 7 p.m. and go at least 12. And maybe the sweet spot, it depends on which author you read. Some say 12 hours, some say 14 hours. Don't eat after dinner. Like stay away from the kitchen after you finish dinner. And then have your next meal 12 to 14 hours later. That is time-restricted eating, and that induces autophagy. Now, there are other ways to fast. the fasting mimicking diet, which has great data behind it in terms of autophagy and reduction of breast cancer cells in both human and animal studies. So that's a different style of fasting. But for those of you interested, the Prolon diet, and you can read about it through the book called Longevity by Walter Longo, is a good thing to take a look at. So I would start with time restricted eating and just reduce the amount that you're taking in after dinner and not eat until the following day, 12 to 14 hours after your last meal. Okay, yes. Don't I know it? So what do you do about skin health? Okay, well, I'm not a good example of that because I've gotten way too much sun exposure. But so I do think that a healthy diet does have I know that a healthy diet and an anti-inflammatory diet has an impact on skin. And skin, by the way, for us is a manifestation. For instance, rosacea. When we're looking at people with rosacea, we're trying to figure out, is the source of that inflammation from the gut? And we try to look for indications of that. But overall, I think you're probably talking about things like wrinkles and so forth. Bruising. Okay, I'm glad you're not talking about wrinkles. So, our subcutaneous fat reduces as we age, making the capillaries much more susceptible to shear stress and injury. And so we bruise way more easily. We'll use things like vitamin C to help improve on that. We'll make sure patients have adequate omega-3s. We check omega-3 levels in their blood, but we haven't figured out how to take fat from, let's say, our belly and send it over to our skin so that we don't bruise as much. But when we do, that'll be revolutionary. So yeah, I generally recommend vitamin C to help reduce that. Some say there's some evidence that bilberry can also be useful for that, but I haven't seen that affected as much. Sure. In terms of wrinkles, I think probably retin A, which is a vitamin A derivative, is probably the best thing that you can use. That most dermatologists feel that if people use that, they would have far less business in the cosmetic dermatology world. Okay, great. Thank you very much for your attention today.
Everyone, please stay with us and enjoy the reception. And as you leave, there are wine glasses as a token of our appreciation for you coming.